At 43. Rachel Mercer stood at the edge of an empty Kansas pasture where 32 cattle used to come running whenever they heard her open the gate. A contagious disease had swept through the herd she had spent 6 years building, killing some animals and forcing the rest to be removed under veterinary orders until not a single cow remained. Then came the bills testing, veterinary care, disposal, sanitation, loan payments, and income from a livestock sale that could no longer happen. When Rachel finally added everything together, she had just $80 in available cash and a cattle farm with no cattle. So she made the only decision that seemed sensible. She would sell Mercer Farm before the bank. Another emergency or another bad month made the decision for her. When word spread, some people quietly said the same stubbornness that kept Rachel fighting too long had finally caught up with her, and a livestock buyer arrived with a low offer that might at least let her walk away. Rachel gave herself 2 weeks to accept it, but then strange things began happening around the farm. A broken section of fence was repaired while she was away. Hay appeared beside her barn, even though she had no animals left to feed, at the feed store. Rachel discovered that part of an old balance had been paid by someone who refused to leave a name. She assumed Tom, her neighboring farmer, was responsible, but he denied it. Then Rachel learned the fence, the hay, and the payment had all come from different people. She tried returning what she could, because Rachel Mercer had spent her entire life believing that if she could not support her own farm, she had no right to keep it. What she did not know was that her neighbors were quietly organizing something behind her back. And when the first livestock trailer rolled into the yard, carrying an animal Rachel had never purchased, she discovered that what was happening had begun long before the disease, long before her herd disappeared, and even long before she became the owner of Mercer Farm. The reason was hidden in something her late father Earl had done during one of the worst winters their farming community had ever survived, and in a short handwritten message he left behind that Rachel had never seen. But before we find out why an entire community was secretly gathering around a woman with only $80 left, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there right now? Whether you're starting your morning, working through the afternoon, or listening late at night, I hope you have a peaceful and wonderful day. And if you enjoy emotional stories about farm life, ordinary people facing impossible setbacks, and communities that still remember what it means to help a neighbor, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story. Now, let's go back to Mercer Cattle Farm before the pastures went silent. On the morning Rachel noticed one cow standing alone beside the water trough, Rachel Mercer noticed the cow because she was standing alone. At 6:30 that morning, the other 31 cattle had gathered near the feed bunk, crowding one another with the familiar impatience Rachel had watched almost every day for 6 years. Number 14 remained beside the water trough with her head lowered. Rachel set down the bucket she was carrying. "Come on, girl." The cow looked toward her but did not move. At 43, Rachel knew every animal in her herd well enough to notice small changes. Number 14 was usually among the first to feed. Rachel approached slowly and saw that the cow's eyes looked dull. She checked the trough, then watched her breathing. Something was wrong. By 7, Rachel had separated her into a small holding pen. Then she noticed another cow moving sluggishly behind the herd. "No," Rachel whispered. She called Dr. Hannah Cole. Hannah arrived before 9 in a mud-spattered veterinary trunk. She examined both cattle, took temperatures, asked about feed changes, recent animal movement, and contact with neighboring livestock. Rachel answered quickly. "Could be something they ate. Could be several things." Hannah's voice remained calm, but she put on fresh gloves before touching the second animal. Rachel noticed, "You're worried." "I'm being careful." Hannah collected samples from both cows. Any coughing in the herd? Nothing unusual. Diarrhea? No. Recent purchases? None. Rachel folded her arms against the morning chill. Mercer Farm was small compared with operations surrounding it, but the herd had taken 6 years to build. When her father Earl died, he left her aging fences, tired equipment, and debt that seemed to reproduce faster than cattle. Rachel had rebuilt slowly, keeping replacement heifers when she could afford to and selling carefully enough to meet payments. 32 head did not sound impressive to large producers. To Rachel, they represented nearly every sacrifice she had made since Earl's death. Hannah finished labeling the samples. "Until I know what we're dealing with, don't move any cattle off this property." Rachel frowned. "I've got animals scheduled for sale next week. For now, they stay." "You think it's contagious?" "I think we shouldn't gamble with someone else's herd." Rachel looked across the pasture. The healthy cattle were feeding normally. 2 sick animals could mean almost anything. How long for results? I'll push them. Hannah packed her equipment. "Keep these 2 isolated. Call me if another one changes." Near noon, Tom Alvarez pulled his pickup beside the gate. His farm bordered Rachel's western pasture, and he had apparently noticed Hannah's truck. "Everything all right?" he asked. "2 cows are sick." Tom glanced toward the holding pen. "Hannah worried." Hannah is professionally incapable of saying she's worried. "That means yes." Rachel gave him a tired look. Tom did not offer to take over. That was one reason she tolerated him when she wanted everyone else gone. Instead, he walked the fence line with her and pointed toward the gate connecting the rear pasture to an access lane. "If she wants restricted movement, chain that one too." Rachel nodded. Together they checked the remaining gates. By afternoon, Mercer Farm felt strangely sealed. Rachel hung temporary notices where necessary and called the buyer expecting cattle the following week. She did not cancel yet. She only warned him there might be a delay. She wanted to believe that distinction mattered. At dusk, she carried water to the isolation pen. Number 14 still refused feed. The second cow had worsened. Rachel stood there until darkness settled over the pasture, listening to the ordinary sounds of the rest of the herd and telling herself that ordinary sounds meant ordinary problems. Then she noticed a third cow standing away from the others. Rachel's stomach tightened. She approached and watched it take several slow steps before stopping. Her phone rang after 9. Hannah's name appeared on the screen. "Tell me you have results," Rachel said. "Preliminary ones." Hannah paused. "Rachel, listen carefully. Until I get there tomorrow, nobody moves an animal onto or off Mercer Farm." Rachel looked through the kitchen window toward the dark pasture. "Hannah, what did they find?" Another pause. "Something serious enough that I need you to lock every gate tonight." Rachel locked the last gate under the beam of her truck headlights, then checked it twice. She slept less than 3 hours by dawn. The third cow was visibly lethargic, and number 14 had barely moved from where Rachel left her. Hannah arrived shortly after 7, carrying protective equipment and a folder she did not immediately open. That frightened Rachel more than anything she might have said. The preliminary test was positive. Hannah told her beside the barn, "The laboratory is confirming it, but we have to treat this as a contagious livestock disease now." Rachel looked toward the pasture. "How contagious?" "Serious enough that nothing moves on or off this farm without clearance. Animals, trailers, equipment that could carry contaminated material, we control all of it." "Can we treat them?" "We can support sick animals where appropriate, but containment matters just as much." "We need to test the herd." Rachel stared at the folder. All 32 yes. The number made the problem suddenly larger. 2 sick cows had become an entire farm under suspicion. Hannah walked Rachel through the quarantine procedures. Separate affected animals where possible. Restrict visitors. Disinfect boots and equipment. Avoid moving anything between pens unnecessarily. Record symptoms and temperatures. Rachel wrote everything down because writing kept her from imagining what might happen if the disease had already spread. Tom arrived later with portable fencing panels and stopped at the road until Hannah cleared where he could safely work, together from designated areas. They strengthened the separation around the isolation pen and marked a clean access route. "You don't need to stay," Rachel told him. "I know. You've got your own cattle. Which is why I'm doing exactly what Hannah says," Rachel almost argued, then handed him another length of temporary fencing. By noon, the livestock buyer called about the sale scheduled for the following week. Rachel looked at the cattle she had planned to ship. That sale was supposed to cover a loan payment, winter feed purchases, and part of a machinery repair. "I have to cancel," she said. Saying it made the lost income real. After the call, she sat in her truck and calculated veterinary visits, laboratory testing, disinfectant, supplies, and the money she would not receive from the sale. The numbers were uncomfortable, but not yet impossible. She had survived bad years before. If the outbreak stopped with 3 animals, she could absorb it. That afternoon, Hannah collected samples across the herd. Rachel helped identify animals and record numbers. Several appeared completely healthy. Rachel clung to that. "Most of them look fine. That's good," Hannah said. "But appearance isn't a test result." By evening, another cow refused feed. Rachel separated her. Then another developed a fever. She moved between pens until after midnight, checking water, watching breathing, and recording every change. She slept in her clothes on the farmhouse couch with an alarm set for 2 hours later. When she returned outside, number 14 was down. Rachel knelt near her, keeping within Hannah's handling instructions. "Come on, girl." The cow tried once to rise and failed. Rachel called Hannah. She arrived before sunrise. For nearly an hour they worked quietly, but number 14 continued deteriorating. Hannah eventually looked at Rachel and gave the smallest shake of her head. Rachel understood before she spoke. The cow died shortly afterward. Rachel remained beside the empty pen after Hannah covered the animal. Number 14 had been born on Mercer Farm 4 years earlier. Rachel remembered pulling her during a difficult calving while Earl's old barn light flickered above them. She had kept that calf because she liked her build and temperament. Now Rachel forced herself to leave the pen because 31 other animals still depended on her. "You need rest," Hannah said. "I need results. They're processing them. Then I'll rest when we know what we're fighting." Rachel spent the morning disinfecting equipment and checking cattle. Tom left food on the farmhouse steps without crossing the quarantine boundary. She ate half a sandwich standing beside the sink. Shortly after noon, Hannah's phone rang. Rachel watched her expression change as she listened. "How many?" Hannah asked. Silence. "You're sure?" She ended the call slowly. Rachel stopped writing temperatures. What Hannah looked toward the herd before meeting her eyes. "The additional tests are back." Rachel gripped the pen. "And Rachel, it isn't just the animals showing symptoms. The pasture seemed suddenly too quiet." "How many are positive?" Hannah took a breath. "Multiple animals. We have spread within the herd." Rachel asked Hannah to repeat the number, not because she had failed to hear it, but because the positive results did not match what she could see. Several of the cattle Hannah named were still eating, still moving normally, still lifting their heads when Rachel approached the fence. "They don't look sick." "Some may not yet," Hannah said. "That doesn't mean they aren't infected." Rachel looked across the pasture at the herd she had spent 6 years building. 31 remained after number 14's death. Until that morning. Rachel had still been thinking in terms of sick animals and healthy animals. Now the line between them had become unreliable. Hannah expanded the separation plan and arranged additional testing. Rachel recorded every animal by number, symptoms, location, and result. The work became mechanical because the alternative was thinking too far ahead. A cow Rachel had raised from a calf developed a fever that afternoon. Another stopped eating before dark. By the following morning, 2 more were showing signs. Rachel moved through the pens with disinfectant on her boots and a notebook in her pocket, sleeping only when exhaustion forced her inside. Tom stayed outside the restricted areas and helped where Hannah permitted. He delivered fencing panels, moved supplies to designated points, and checked that nobody entered by the rear access road. On the 3rd day, Hannah found Rachel standing beside a young cow that had tested positive despite showing no obvious symptoms. "There has to be another test," Rachel said. "We can confirm where necessary." "Then confirm all of them." "Rachel, if an animal looks healthy, I'm not making decisions based on one piece of paper." Hannah did not argue. "Then we confirm. But you need to understand what happens if the results agree." Rachel knew what she meant and refused to answer. The confirmations agreed. Meanwhile, the sickest cattle deteriorated. Hannah provided supportive treatment where it was appropriate, but she was increasingly direct about the limits of what they could accomplish. Several animals posed a continuing disease risk. Keeping them indefinitely would not protect the remaining herd, and it could endanger cattle beyond Mercer Farm if containment failed. "You're asking me to destroy animals that are still standing," Rachel said. "I'm telling you we may have to humanely remove infected animals under the containment plan." Hannah met her eyes. "For several of them, yes, we're there." Rachel walked away. She reached the equipment shed before anger broke through. She kicked an empty bucket hard enough to send it across the concrete. 6 years of breeding decisions, calving nights, feed bills, fence repairs, and careful sales had been reduced to laboratory results and numbered lists. When Tom found her later, she was sitting on the tailgate of her truck. "Hannah told you," Rachel asked, "only that things got worse. They want to remove positive cattle that don't even look sick." Tom leaned against the truck, but kept his distance. "What does Hannah say happens if you don't?" "Don't, I'm asking." Rachel stared at him. "Risk to the rest, risk outside the farm. My cattle are across your west fence. I know where your cattle are. Then you know this isn't only your herd anymore." The words hurt because they were true. Rachel looked toward his pasture beyond the boundary. If she delayed because she could not bear losing her own cattle, she could put Tom's herd at risk. Beyond his farm were others. "I hate you right now," she said. "That's fine. And Hannah?" "Probably fine too." Rachel wiped her face with the heel of her hand. "I know what I have to do." The removals began under veterinary supervision. Rachel insisted on being present. She identified each animal herself. Some had been born on the farm. One was the daughter of the first heifer Rachel kept after Earl died. Another had survived a difficult winter and produced 3 strong calves. Rachel remembered histories that no laboratory sheet could record. The herd became smaller by the day. 32 had once felt modest. 24 felt frightening. 18 looked impossible. Rachel stopped counting aloud after that, though she continued writing every number in her notebook. Some animals died as the illness progressed. Others had to be humanely destroyed because of infection and continuing risk. Each loss changed the sound of the farm. There were fewer hooves around the feed bunk, fewer bodies moving through the pasture, fewer low calls at dusk. Hannah kept testing. Rachel kept hoping for a boundary the disease would not cross. One group remained separated and initially appeared untouched. For 2 days, Rachel built all her hope around them. She checked them before sunrise and again after dark. They ate, they drank, they looked normal. Maybe this is where it stops, she told Hannah. Hannah did not promise anything. The next round of results arrived late in the afternoon. Rachel was washing equipment when Hannah approached carrying the list. She did not need to ask whether it was good news. The remaining group, Rachel said. Hannah nodded. We have positives. Rachel closed her eyes. How many? Enough that containment changes. Rachel leaned both hands against the wash table. Tell me exactly what that means. Hannah waited until Rachel looked at her. It means we can't protect Mercer Farm by separating groups anymore. Rachel glanced toward the remaining cattle, still moving across the pasture as though nothing had changed. Hannah's voice softened, but the words did not. To contain this now, we have to clear the remaining infected group. The last infected cattle were removed under Hannah's supervision 2 mornings later. Rachel stood at the gate with her notebook in one hand and did not look away. By then, there were so few animals left that each movement seemed louder than it should have been. When the final trailer pulled onto the road, Rachel remained beside the fence until the sound disappeared. Then there was nothing. No cattle crowding the feed bunk. No low calls from the pasture. No animals lifting their heads when she opened the gate. For 6 years. Mercer Farm had been measured in chores that never stopped. Now the work ended before noon. Hannah stayed long enough to review sanitation requirements, follow-up testing, and the period before livestock could safely return. You did the right thing, she said. Rachel looked across the empty pasture. It doesn't feel like it. It usually doesn't. After Hannah left, Rachel walked the field alone. Tracks still marked the mud near the trough. A broken length of twine hung from one fence post. Everything looked prepared for animals that were no longer there. The grief hit her hardest when she reached the feed bunk and realized she had automatically counted spaces. 32. She had once thought 32 was a small herd. Now it felt enormous. Practical reality arrived faster than grief allowed. Veterinary invoices came first, then laboratory fees, disposal costs, sanitation supplies, the loan payment she had expected to cover with the canceled livestock sale, and routine farm expenses that continued whether cattle stood in the pasture or not. Rachel sat at the kitchen table with statements spread around her calculator. She moved numbers from one column to another, searching for a version that hurt less. There wasn't one. After required payments cleared and the most urgent bills were covered, her checking account showed $80 available. She stared at the number. 80. Not 800, not enough to restock, barely enough to buy groceries and fuel. June arrived that afternoon carrying a casserole Rachel had not asked for. Her aunt set it on the counter and took one look at the papers. How bad is Nunnable? June raised an eyebrow. Rachel, I said I'll manage. That wasn't the question. Rachel closed the checkbook. I have $80 I can actually use. Happy June pulled out a chair. No, neither am I. What are you going to do? Rachel looked through the window toward the empty pasture. Figure it out. June started to speak, then stopped. She knew better than to offer money Rachel would refuse. Your father used to say that exact thing when he had no plan. Good to know I inherited something. June's face tightened, but she let the remark pass. The next morning, a white pickup rolled into the drive. Wade Brennan stepped out wearing clean boots and a jacket too nice for cattle work. Rachel knew him by reputation. He bought livestock, distressed equipment, and occasionally entire farms when owners needed fast exits. Heard about the herd. He said, Bad deal. That's one way to put it. Wade looked toward the pasture. You thinking about restocking? Rachel almost laughed. With what? He nodded as though that answered something for him. I might be interested in the place. Rachel folded her arms. The farm isn't listed. Doesn't have to be. He named a figure. It was lower than what Rachel believed Mercer Farm should be worth, even with the damage to her finances. No, you haven't heard the terms. I heard the number. Wade remained calm. It clears pressure quickly. No waiting on buyers. No wondering what happens if another bill lands next month. That part was harder to dismiss. You always show up this fast. I show up before people run out of choices. Rachel hated the sentence because it sounded less cruel than practical. Wade left a written offer on the porch rail. Think about it. I don't need 2 weeks to say no. Maybe not today. He got back into the truck. Give me an answer in 2 weeks. Rachel watched him drive away, then picked up the paper. She intended to tear it in half. Instead, she carried it inside. That evening, she calculated again, $80. No herd, no sale income, ongoing loan payments, a farm built for cattle and nothing in the pastures. The offer was insulting, but it was real. It would let her walk away before debt decided for her. Rachel folded the paper and placed it beside the checkbook. When June called that night, Rachel told her only one thing. I'm giving myself 2 weeks. For what? Rachel looked toward the dark fields beyond the kitchen window. To decide whether Mercer Farm is still mine to keep. Rachel spent the first 3 days of Wade Brennan's 2-week deadline making lists. Equipment she could sell, tools she could keep, repairs that might increase the farm's value, bills that would still exist after the cattle were gone. She used part of the $80 on groceries, diesel, and basic supplies, then hated watching the balance shrink further. The farm felt wrong without livestock. Gates stayed where she left them. Feed bunks remained empty. Every chore seemed temporary, as if she were maintaining a place that already belonged to someone else. Tom found her near the equipment shed, measuring an old stock trailer. What are you doing? Figuring out what it's worth, why Rachel kept writing. Because people sell things when they need money. You selling the farm too? She stopped. Maybe. Tom looked toward the empty pasture. Do you want to? That doesn't matter. It matters more than the trailer. Rachel turned on him. I have $80. Tom, I don't have a herd. I don't have income coming in. Wanting to stay doesn't pay bills. No. But neither does pretending leaving is the only responsible choice. Easy to say when your cattle are still standing. He absorbed that without reacting. Rachel regretted the words immediately, but did not apologize. I'm not asking you to save me, she said. I know. Then stop acting like selling means I failed. Tom studied her. I think you already believe that. He left before she could answer. The next morning, Rachel walked the north fence and stopped halfway down the line. A section that had sagged for months was tight again. 2 posts had been reset. Fresh wire gleamed against the older strands. She called Tom. You fixed my north fence. No, don't be difficult. I'm not. I didn't touch it. Rachel looked at the new staples. Then who did? Ask whoever owns a post driver and too much free time. That describes half the county. Exactly. She hung up, irritated. There was no reason anyone would repair fencing on a farm she might sell. That afternoon, a flatbed appeared beside the barn carrying several large round bales. The driver unloaded them before Rachel could stop him. Wrong farm, she said. He checked the delivery slip. Mercer. I didn't order hay. Already paid. By who? The driver shrugged. Not on my sheet. I don't even have cattle. Then you've got hay for when you do. Rachel stared at him until he climbed back into the truck. She called the supplier and received the same answer. Paid. No name released. The bales sat beside the barn like an accusation. She was still deciding whom to call when she drove into town for fuel and stopped at the feed store to ask about an old balance left from before the outbreak. The clerk checked the account. "You're lower than you think." Rachel frowned. "What do you mean?" "Somebody paid part of it yesterday." "Who?" "Asked not to be named." "Reverse it." The clerk blinked. "What?" "Put the money back." "I can't reverse another customer's payment because you're stubborn." Rachel leaned on the counter. "I didn't authorize anyone to pay my bills." "You don't authorize gifts." "I don't want gifts." The clerk softened. "Rachel, maybe just take the help?" "No." She drove home angrier than when she left. The repaired fence, hay, and feed balance all felt like debts multiplying around her. She called Tom again. "If this is you organizing people, it isn't. You expect me to believe 3 things happened in 2 days by accident? No." "Then who?" "I don't know." "All of them." The answer caught her. "All of them." Tom went quiet. "Rachel, so you do know something." "I know people heard what happened." "That's not an answer." She ended the call. The next morning, she found a note tucked beneath the twine on one of the hay bales. No name, just 4 words. "Use it when ready." Rachel carried it inside and placed it beside Wade's offer. She began making phone calls. Caleb Dunn admitted fixing the fence after his grandfather mentioned the North Line had been bad for years. An older farmer named Vernon Tate admitted paying part of the feed balance. The hay came from another family entirely. None had coordinated directly with the others. At least, not according to what they told Rachel. By evening, she had 3 names and no single person to blame. That unsettled her more than if Tom had been behind everything. She stood at the kitchen table looking at Wade's offer, the anonymous note, and a list of people helping a farm with no cattle. The strange part was no longer that someone had decided to help. It was that several people had made the same decision separately. Rachel spent the next 2 days trying to undo what other people had done for her. She called Vernon Tate first and offered to repay the feed store balance in installments once she had money again. Vernon laughed once. Not unkindly. "No, I'm serious. So am I." "Then let me at least write you something." "Rachel, I paid a bill. I didn't buy part of your farm. Caleb Dunn was no easier." She found him near his own fence line and told him she would pay for the posts and wire. "They were leftovers," he said. "That doesn't make your time free." "I'm 27. Apparently I have too much of it, Caleb." He leaned against the post driver. "My grandfather told me your dad rebuilt half his south fence after that ice storm years ago. Wouldn't take $1. So consider us even." Rachel frowned. "I didn't ask my father to do that. Neither did Grandpa. The hay supplier refused payment too." By the time Rachel returned home, she felt more trapped than grateful. Every favor seemed to attach another invisible obligation to Mercer Farm. June arrived that evening and found Rachel at the kitchen table with a notebook full of names and dollar estimates. "What's that?" "What I owe people." June sat across from her. "You're keeping accounts. Somebody has to." "Why?" Rachel looked up. "Because I'm not going to become the woman everybody has to carry." June's expression sharpened. "You think you're the first Mercer anyone ever helped?" Rachel stiffened. "If Dad needed help, he should have kept better records." "That's not what I mean." June leaned back. Earl was usually the one helping. Rachel stared at her. June began naming incidents Rachel barely remembered or had never heard about at all. A neighbor's barn roof after a spring storm. A broken stock trailer repaired overnight. Hay delivered during drought. A family whose cattle Earl temporarily housed when floodwater reached their pasture. He was in debt half his life. Rachel said, "Exactly." "Then why was he giving things away?" "Because someone needed them." Rachel shook her head. "That sounds irresponsible." It sounds like Earl, June's voice softened. He didn't always have money. Sometimes he had a tractor, sometimes labor, sometimes a spare roll of wire. Rachel thought of Caleb's repaired fence. People remember that. People remember who showed up. Rachel pushed the notebook aside. That doesn't mean they owe me. Maybe they don't think they do. Then why are they doing this? June looked at her for a long moment. Because that's how some places survive. Rachel stood and walked to the window. The hay bales sat beside the barn, unused. I don't want charity. You keep calling it charity because that gives you permission to refuse it. Rachel turned. And what would you call it, neighboring? The word irritated her because it sounded too simple. The next morning, Rachel drove to town and tried again to pay the feed store balance. The clerk refused to reverse Vernon's payment. When Rachel left, Wade Brennan was leaning against his pickup outside. Still thinking? He asked. About your offer. Deadline's getting close. I know. Wade nodded toward the empty pasture visible beyond the road. Help from neighbors won't change cash flow. Rachel's jaw tightened. You keeping track of who brings me hay now? Small county? Then you also know I haven't accepted your offer. Not yet. He got into his truck. A week from now, the number stays the same. Your bills won't. Rachel watched him drive away and hated that he was right about one thing. Kindness did not erase arithmetic. That afternoon, Tom arrived at the road and waited until Rachel waved him in. You've been making people uncomfortable, he said. Good. Vernon says you tried to pay him with money you don't have. That's between me and Vernon. Tom looked toward the hay. Caleb says you offered him fencing money. Also not your business. You're working very hard to turn help into debt. Rachel crossed her arms. Because debt is honest. So is help. Not when nobody tells me what they expect back. Tom was quiet for a second. Maybe nothing. Rachel laughed without humor. Nobody expects nothing. Your dad did. Apparently everyone remembers my father better than I do. Tom's expression changed. Maybe they remember parts he didn't talk about. Before Rachel could answer, he handed her a folded note. Saturday morning, livestock yard, 8 o'clock. Rachel looked at it. Why just come? Tom, I'm not explaining it here. If this is another favor, come anyway. He walked back toward his truck. Rachel called after him. I'm not promising anything. Tom opened the door. You don't have to. She stood in the yard with Wade's deadline narrowing. A repaired fence she had not paid for, hay she had not ordered, and debts she could not return. Then she looked again at the note in her hand. Saturday, livestock yard, 8 o'clock. Rachel almost did not go. At 7:30 Saturday morning, she stood in her kitchen with Tom's folded note beside Wade Brennan's offer and told herself the livestock yard was the last place she needed to be. Then she drove there anyway. Several pickups were already parked along the fence when she arrived. Tom stood near the loading pens with Caleb Dunn, Vernon Tate, and 4 other farmers Rachel recognized from neighboring properties. Nobody looked surprised to see her. What is this? She asked. Tom glanced toward the road. Wait a minute. I'm done waiting for people to explain things after they happen. Before he could answer, the sound of a diesel engine came from the entrance. A livestock trailer rolled through the gate and stopped beside the pens. Rachel knew the driver, a woman whose family farmed 12 miles south. She stepped out and opened the side door. Inside stood a bred heifer, calm and broad through the middle. Rachel looked from the animal to Tom. No, you haven't heard anything yet. I don't need to. The woman approached Rachel. She's due in early spring. Good disposition, clean health records. I can't take her. You're not buying her. That's exactly why I can't take her. Another truck appeared before Rachel finished speaking. This trailer carried 2 young cows. Then a third pickup arrived without a trailer, its owner handing Tom an envelope containing documentation for another animal being held temporarily at his farm. Rachel stared at the growing group. "You organized this?" Tom nodded. "Some of it." "How many?" "Enough to start small." "Stop," her voice carried across the yard. Conversation died immediately. Rachel looked at the heifer, then at the people surrounding her. "Do you understand what these animals are worth?" Vernon said. "Yes." "Then you understand I can't repay this." Caleb leaned against the fence. "Nobody asked you to." "That doesn't make it free." "Why does it have to?" Rachel turned on Tom. "Because I lost everything. That doesn't mean everybody gets to rebuild it for me." "Nobody thinks that." "Really? Because there are cattle showing up at a yard with my name apparently attached to them?" Tom's face remained calm. "You had 32 head. This isn't 32. It's still thousands of dollars, spread across several farms." "That doesn't matter. It matters to the people giving." Rachel felt heat rise into her face. "I said I don't want charity." The woman who brought the bread heifer shook her head. "Then don't call it that." Rachel looked at her. "What would you call it? A cow?" A few people smiled, but Rachel did not. The woman continued. My family keeps enough replacements that giving you one won't break us," Vernon said. "Same idea with what I paid at the feed store," Caleb added. "And fence posts." Rachel's chest tightened. "You all talked about this?" Tom answered carefully. "Yes." "Behind my back? Because you would have stopped us before we started." "Exactly." Another trailer entered the yard. Rachel stepped backward. "No, I'm done." Tom moved closer, but did not touch her. "Rachel, nobody is trying to replace your old herd overnight. We know you're not even cleared to bring cattle back yet. Temporary housing is arranged." "You arranged that too?" "Yes." She laughed once, sharply. "Of course you did. We're trying to give you a beginning." "I had a beginning. 6 years ago. I built from there. And now you need another one." The words broke through something she had been holding together since number 14 first stood alone beside the trough. Rachel looked at the heifer in the pen and suddenly saw all 32 cattle that were gone. Calves she had pulled in freezing barns, cows she had kept because their mothers were good, animals she could identify at a distance by the way they walked. "You can't replace them," she said. Tom's voice softened. "We know. Then why are you doing this? Because the farm doesn't have to end with them." Rachel shook her head. "I cannot owe this many people." "You don't say that." "It's true. Nothing is free, Tom." Her voice cracked. "Nothing." The silence that followed felt unbearable. Rachel turned, walked to her truck, and drove away before anyone could stop her. June was waiting at Mercer Farm when Rachel arrived. Rachel barely made it through the kitchen door before saying, "They're trying to give me cattle." June nodded. "I know." Rachel stared at her. "You knew too?" "Some of it." "Everyone knew except me." "Because you would have refused before hearing why." "I did refuse." Rachel dropped her keys on the table. "Good, good. Now you can stop thinking the animals are the whole point." Rachel looked at her aunt. "Then what is the point?" June stepped closer. "Those people aren't doing this because they feel sorry for you." "Then why?" June's eyes filled, but her voice remained steady. "They're doing what your father told them to do." Rachel stared at June across the kitchen. "Dad told them to give me cattle." "No." June pulled out a chair. "Sit down." Rachel remained standing. "Then tell me what you mean." June folded her hands on the table. "You remember the winter when you were 17? The one when the ice came before the snow?" Rachel remembered pieces of it, frozen pipes, school closures. Earl disappearing before daylight and returning after dark with his coat stiff from cold. Barely. Roads were blocked for days. Feed trucks couldn't get through. Power lines came down. Some farms had cattle they couldn't reach properly, and some were almost out of hay. June described Earl using his old tractor to clear routes between neighboring properties before county equipment reached the smaller roads. He hauled hay from Mercer Farm to families running short. When a barn roof partially failed, Earl moved several cattle into his own barn and makeshift pens until repairs could be made. He didn't have extra money. Rachel said, "I know. He barely had extra hay." "I know that too." June's voice remained calm. "That's why people remember one of the farms Earl reached belonged to Vernon Tate's family. Another belonged to Caleb Dunn's grandparents. Tom's father had been trying to keep cattle fed on the western side of his property when Earl cleared enough of the road for a hay delivery to reach him." Other families Rachel knew only by name had similar stories. "Why didn't Dad ever tell me?" "Because he didn't think helping somebody was a story about him." Rachel sat down slowly. She remembered Earl differently. She remembered overdue bills on the kitchen counter and arguments about equipment repairs. She remembered how tired he looked in his final years, and how stubbornly he refused to discuss money. The idea that he had given away time, fuel, hay, and labor while struggling himself seemed almost irresponsible. Yet she could not dismiss what had happened at the livestock yard. "Did they pay him back?" she asked. June smiled faintly. "They tried. After the winter, one farmer brought cash for diesel. Earl refused it. Another tried replacing more hay than he had received. Earl accepted only what he needed. Someone else offered to pay for tractor repairs after Earl damaged a tire clearing a lane. He refused that too. "That sounds like him," Rachel admitted. "Stubborn enough to make generosity irritating." June stood and walked toward the old cabinet beside the refrigerator. "After Earl died, I helped sort some of his papers. There was one thing I kept because I thought you'd throw it away with the receipts." "You took Dad's papers? One envelope?" June removed an old envelope from her handbag instead. "I brought it today because I suspected we might finally need it." Inside was a folded sheet of paper, yellowed along the creases. The first half was a note from a farmer Rachel vaguely remembered, thanking Earl for helping his family through that winter. The man had enclosed money to repay fuel, hay, and labor. Beneath the message, in Earl's blocky handwriting, was a copy of the response he apparently sent back. Rachel recognized the handwriting immediately. She read the short sentence once, then again. "Don't pay me back. Help the next farm." Rachel lowered the page. That's it. That was enough. June explained that the phrase traveled farther than Earl probably knew. Some people repeated it when they helped someone else. Others simply remembered it. Over the years, the original debts became impossible to trace. A farmer Earl helped might later lend equipment to someone who had never met him. That person might help another family during drought. Children grew up hearing why their parents never charged a neighbor for certain work. So they think they owe him. Rachel said, "No." June leaned forward. "That's the part you keep getting wrong. Earl told them not to pay him back." Rachel looked at the paper again. "Then why me?" "Because right now you're the next farm." The words silenced her. All week, Rachel had treated every repaired post, bale of hay, and paid bill as a debt attaching itself to her name. She had assumed accepting help meant becoming the last person in a chain of obligation, the person who took more than she could return. Earl's note described something entirely different. The help was supposed to keep moving. She did not have to repay Vernon with money or Caleb with fence posts or return a bred heifer to the family offering it. Someday, if Mercer Farm survived, someone else would need something she could provide. Rachel pressed her thumb against the fold in the paper. "I told them no." You were scared. I was rude.
Also true.
Rachel laughed weakly, then wiped her eyes. Outside, the pasture remained empty. Understanding Earl's note had not restored a single animal or erased one bill. Wade's offer was still on the table. The farm still had almost no cash. Veterinary clearance was not complete. Accepting a starter herd would mean years of work, not rescue from work. But for the first time since number 14 became sick, Rachel could imagine those years existing. She picked up her phone. Wade answered on the third ring. Rachel? You said you needed my decision. I do. She looked at Earl's handwriting one more time. Then I've made it. Rachel met Wade Brennan at the farm gate the next morning with his written offer folded in her back pocket. He stepped from his truck already carrying a pen. You ready? Yes. Wade looked toward the empty pasture. Then we can make this simple. Rachel pulled out the offer, tore it once down the middle, then again. Mercer Farm isn't for sale. Wade's expression barely changed. You sure? More sure than I was 2 weeks ago. Your finances haven't improved. No. You still have no cattle. Not yet. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, but if you change your mind, the offer may not be the same. That's fine. When he drove away, Rachel did not feel triumphant. She felt terrified. Keeping the farm meant choosing years of work with no guarantee the plan would succeed. By noon, Tom was at the kitchen table with a legal pad, and Dr. Hannah Cole joined them by phone. Rachel explained that she wanted to accept the starter herd, but only when Mercer Farm was medically cleared. Hannah agreed. No shortcuts. We finish sanitation, complete the waiting period, and retest where required. New animals come in only after I sign off. Tom wrote down dates. Until then, we've got temporary pasture arranged. Rachel frowned. Where? Spread out. Nobody is holding too many. I don't want anyone risking their herd. They won't. Hannah already gave us separation guidance. Rachel looked at him. You planned all this before I said yes? We planned for the possibility that you might. Over the next several days, the restart became practical instead of emotional. Hannah inspected, cleaned pens, equipment, water points, and quarantine areas. Rachel replaced contaminated materials where necessary and documented every step. Tom helped map how donated cattle could arrive in stages rather than all at once. The numbers were deliberately small. A bred heifer from one farm, 2 young cows from another, several additional animals pledged only after clearance. It was not 32 head, and nobody pretended it was. Rachel began a new notebook. On the first page, she wrote every contributor's name she knew: Vernon Tate, Caleb Dunn, the family that supplied hay, the woman who offered the bred heifer. Others followed. Tom noticed the list one evening. What's that? Names? I can see that. I want to remember everyone. He leaned against the barn door. Earl never kept a list. Rachel thought of the note June had shown her. I'm not keeping it to repay them. Then why? So when somebody else needs something, I remember what this felt like. Tom smiled. That makes more sense. The hardest part was waiting. Rachel could see the beginning forming around her, but the pastures still had to remain empty. Every day she checked with Hannah. Every day Hannah gave the same answer: not yet. Rachel resisted the urge to push. The disease had taught her what happened when hope tried to outrun containment. She would not risk anyone else's cattle simply because she was desperate to hear animals in the pasture again. Then, late on a cold, clear morning, Hannah arrived with the final paperwork. She walked the farm once more, checked the last sanitation records, and reviewed the test results. Rachel followed in silence until they reached the main gate. Hannah signed the bottom of the form against the hood of her truck. You're cleared. Rachel stared at the signature. For cattle to return under the restart plan we discussed, Rachel let out a breath that felt as if she had been holding it since number 14 first stood alone beside the water trough. Tom, waiting near the fence, looked at her. "That's it?" Rachel nodded. "That's it." The pasture beyond them was still empty, but for the first time, it was empty because something was coming back. The first trailer arrived at Mercer Farm just after sunrise. Rachel stood beside the main gate with Hannah's clearance paperwork folded in her jacket pocket, and both hands wrapped around a mug she had forgotten to drink from. Tom opened the outer gate while Caleb waited near the holding pen with fresh feed. June stood farther back by the barn, saying nothing. When the trailer door opened, the bred heifer Rachel had refused at the livestock yard stepped cautiously onto the ramp. Rachel felt her throat tighten. The animal paused, sniffed the cold air, then walked into the pen. A second trailer arrived with the 2 young cows. Another followed later that morning. Each animal came with health records, identification, and the careful biosecurity steps Hannah had required. Nobody rushed. Nobody treated the day like a miracle that erased what had happened. Rachel checked paperwork, watched movement, and listened to Hannah repeat instructions she already knew. The new herd was small, painfully small compared with the 32 cattle that once filled the pasture. But when the first heifer lowered her head to feed, Rachel heard a sound she had thought might never return to Mercer Farm. Hooves on packed ground. Caleb leaned against the fence. "Feels different, doesn't it?" Rachel nodded. "It's supposed to." The farm would not become whole simply because cattle stood inside it again. Debt remained. Cash flow was fragile. The next breeding season mattered. So did feed costs, veterinary monitoring, and every decision Rachel made for years afterward. But she had something she did not possess when Wade Brennan first handed her his offer. A beginning. Tom spent the afternoon repairing the final gate latch, while Rachel moved supplies into place. "You know I could have done that," she told him. "I know." "Then why are you doing it?" "Because I'm standing here and you're carrying feed." Rachel glanced at him. "You always have an answer, only when the question is easy." Their eyes met for a moment, warm but uncomplicated. Then Tom returned to the latch. June helped Rachel frame Earl's old note. They hung it inside the farmhouse near the kitchen table, where Rachel once calculated that she had only $80 left. The paper looked almost too ordinary for the weight it now carried. "Don't pay me back. Help the next farmer." Rachel stood beneath it for a long time. "He would hate that you framed his handwriting," June said. Rachel laughed. "He'd say the frame cost too much." Exactly. Over the following months, the starter herd settled. The bred heifer calved successfully in early spring. Rachel checked on the calf 3 times the first night, even though everything was normal. 2 more calves followed later. Each birth felt important, but she refused to count them as proof that the danger had passed. She had learned too much about how quickly certainty could disappear. Instead, she worked steadily. She rebuilt records, restored small portions of income, renegotiated what she could, and accepted that recovery would happen 1 season at a time. When cash was tight, she said so. When she needed help moving something heavy, she asked. The first few times still felt uncomfortable, then less so. She stopped treating every favor as a debt that had to be repaid immediately. The notebook of names remained in her desk drawer, not a ledger of obligations, a reminder. Vernon Tate, Caleb Dunn, Tom Alvarez. The families who brought cattle, hay, labor, transportation, and time. Rachel added Hannah's name too, though Hannah protested when she found out. "I did my job. You did more than that. Then help someone else when you can." Rachel smiled. That sounds familiar. By late summer, the pastures no longer looked empty. The herd was nowhere near 32 head, but cattle moved through the grass again, and the farm had found a rhythm Rachel once feared was gone permanently. Then one afternoon, Caleb called. A critical piece of equipment had failed on his property during a narrow window of work, and the replacement would not arrive until the following day. "I hate asking," he said. Rachel looked toward Earl's old tractor in the shed. It was aging, loud, and still functional. "Give me 20 minutes." She drove over with the tractor and spent the rest of the afternoon helping finish what Caleb could not afford to delay. The work was tiring and ordinary. That was what made it meaningful. Near sunset, Caleb wiped his hands on his jeans and said, "What do I owe you?" Rachel almost answered automatically. Fuel, time, something fair. Instead, she remembered the livestock yard, the repaired fence, the hay beside her barn, and Earl's note hanging above the kitchen table. Nothing. Caleb frowned. "Rachel," she smiled, "help the next farm." He understood immediately, for the first time. Saying the words did not feel like borrowing something from her father. They felt like hers to carry. That evening, Rachel returned to Mercer Farm and stopped beside the same gate where she had once watched the last infected cattle leave. The light was fading over the eastern Kansas fields. Several cows moved slowly across the pasture toward water, and one calf broke into an awkward run before returning to its mother. Rachel rested her arms on the fence. She had once looked at 32 cattle and believed they proved she had rebuilt the farm by herself. Then disease took every one of them, and she believed the empty pastures proved she had failed. Neither belief had been entirely true. Mercer Farm had never stood alone. Earl had known that. The neighbors knew it. Rachel had simply needed to lose almost everything before she understood what they meant. The new herd was smaller. The debt was still real. The work ahead was long. But the pasture was no longer silent. Rachel listened to cattle moving through the grass and thought about the $80 left in her account, the offer she tore apart, and the people who brought back one animal at a time. Earl had not left her a fortune. He had left her something harder to measure and far more durable a place in a circle of people who showed up when another farm could no longer carry the weight alone. Rachel looked toward the farmhouse where his note hung on the wall, then back across the pasture. Somewhere, eventually, another gate would need fixing. Another family would need hay. Another farmer would make a call they hated making. When that happened, Rachel finally knew what she would do.